So we continue our discussion on Tzitzit. Yeah, so yesterday we talked about, or we read the mitzvah of Tzitzit from the Torah, the parsha of Vayomer, which begins Vayomer. We say it in the third parsha of Shema, the third paragraph of Shema. And essentially we learned from the Torah that there are two things, right? There are two parts to the mitzvah. One is called Techelet, the blue string, and the other one is Tzitzit, just the regular string. The word Tzitzit, we said, means, Rashi gave two meanings, but the basic meaning means fringes, things that hang off the corners. And the Torah says that on the corners with your Tzitzit, you should put Techelet. Two separate parts of the mitzvah. The first thing we learned.
If you just have a shirt.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. That's the first thing we learned. The second thing we learned is the Torah itself says what the message of Tzitzit is. First of all, it's a reminder. It's a reminder for the 613 commandments. We explained, right? Tzitzit has 613. The gematria of Tzitzit is 600 plus 8 strings plus 5 knots makes 613. And lo tatudru acher lavavchem v'acher einechem. We talked about how the fact that Hashem understands that we have a heart and we have eyes that love things and want things. And Tzitzit is a reminder. If it's not the right thing to want, don't do it. Control yourself. Right? That's what Tzitzit is. Clear? Now let's look more about this Techelet. What is this Techelet? Okay? So look at the page. I think it's the third page. Sure. Yeah, 1, 2. It's the third page. We're learning the Gemara in Menachos, Mem Beis Amud Beis, 42b. It's a perek called Perek Techeles. It's a chapter that talks a lot about Tzitzit. So it says the Gemara like this. Amalei Abaye Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. You can see it in the English also. In the English, wherever it's bold, that's the translation. And if it's not bold, then it's the commentary. See it? Okay, so you can look at the English or the Hebrew, or the Aramaic, I should say. Amalei Abaye Rav Shmuel Bar Rav Yehuda. Abaye said to Rav Shmuel, son of Yehuda, Hatechilta, this Techelet, heichi tzviusela. How do you dye it? How do you paint it to this color? The sky blue color. Amalei, he said. So Rav Shmuel explained to Abaye how you make the Techelet. Ready? You see it's a very elaborate production. My sinan dam chilazon. We bring the blood of the chilazon. We'll learn in a minute what chilazon is. So you bring the blood of the chilazon. V'saminon ev'raminon loho biyura. And you take herbs with it, and you put it into a pot. And you boil it up. Right? And you take a bit of this mixture, this blood mixed with certain herbs, and you put it into an eggshell. Okay? And that's how you test it. On a piece of wool. So you take this blood mixed with the herbs, boil it in a pot, pour it into a little bit into a eggshell. Take the eggshell and put it onto a wool to test it to make sure it's the right color. And then if it's the right one, then you take that piece of, you throw away the eggshell and you burn the piece of wool. That's what you have to do to make the Techelet. Yeah. That's a big discussion as to whether or not they're doing the right, whether or not they do that or not. There's certainly nothing wrong with it, but many feel that because we don't know what it is, better leave it alone. As you see here, it's a very complicated process. You have to find this chilazon fish. You have to boil the blood together with some spices. 1 second, we'll get to that in a second. But right now, the Gemara just told us you take a chilazon. What a chilazon is, we'll look at the next Gemara, which can tell us what a chilazon is. But we're learning here, you take a chilazon fish, take the blood, mix it with spices. It doesn't say which spices, so we didn't even know how to do that. Or herbs, I should say, not spices. Boil it, pour it into an eggshell. Take the eggshell, pour it onto a piece of wool. Test it. If it's the right color, throw away the eggshell, burn the wool, and now you have your dye. Now you have your Techelet color. guess it's a certain type of fish. They probably had plenty, I guess. I don't know. So let's see. Look at the next Gemara. The Gemara in a few pages later tells us what the chilazon is. Tan Rabbanan, our sages taught. Chilazon is the second text on the third page there. Menachot 44a. Mem Dal Mem Aleph. Tan Rabbanan, the Gemara, our sages taught. Chilazon. The chilazon is zeu gufay doim layam. His body itself looks like the ocean. Ubriyosai, its shape, doim ladav, looks like a fish. Va'oila echad leshivim shana. And it only comes up every 70 years. So once in every 70 years, these fish, the chilazon fish, which lives somewhere in the deep, dark ocean, comes up. Yeah? Somewhere deep down in the ocean. You ever watch like these National Geographics on these deep dives? There are parts of the ocean that are so extremely deep that they're black day or night. You ever seen those things? It's quite fascinating. So it must be somewhere down there. And once every 70 years, it comes to the top.
And its form resembles that of a fish.
Yeah. So it's some kind of sea creature. But it looks like in other words, its color, it looks like the ocean itself. It doesn't say. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't even know if it's kosher. Very good question. I don't know. Good question. I don't even know what it is. That's true. That's true. If it's not actually a fish, it's not kosher. There's no seafood. There's no seafood. That's right. Seafood that isn't a fish isn't kosher. You're right. Maybe it isn't kosher. I don't know. I really don't know. V'damai, but uses blood. So even Techelet, therefore its blood is very expensive. It's a very expensive fish because of how hard it is to get. So the reason why I'm looking at all these Gemaras is to demonstrate and to show you that basically making the Techelet itself is a complicated process. With these herbs, what kind of herbs, you got to boil it. And number two, the fish itself is hard to get. So we don't know what it is. It's hard to get. We don't know this. We don't know the recipe to make it. So we're kind of stuck. And that's why we don't have it. Now the question becomes, how could you do a half a mitzvah? The Torah says to have Techelet and Tzitzit, right? Right? So over here, what are we doing? We're only doing Tzitzit part, not the Techelet part. Right? So says the Gemara like this. This is the Mishnah a little earlier in Menachot. Ready? You see it? It's the third text on the third page there. Ha-Techelet, the Techelet, getting this blue Techelet, Einema kevet alavan, does not stop you from doing the mitzvah with the white. V'alavan, and doing the mitzvah with the white, Einema kevet Techelet, does not stop you from doing the mitzvah with the Techelet. In other words, like this, each of them are separate from each other, and you could do one without the other. And that's similar to, so you can have either all Techelet, or all Tzitzit, or the proper way is both. But you still did the mitzvah if you just have one. Clear? Hashem must have showed it to him or told him. They're not far from the Mediterranean. They went through the Dead Sea, didn't they? So they're not far. Maybe they were together. I really don't know. If I knew what the chilazon was, I can tell you, but I don't know. I don't know. So maybe until like we're learning here that you can have one or the other, and like we have only tzitzit, not techelet. So maybe they used tzitzit because that's easy to get, wool, right? And then as they got more and more techelet, more and more people added techelet to their tzitzit. So it could be for a long time many people didn't have techelet. I don't know. Good question. Techelet. He made that's something else. Yeah. But it's a dye. In other words, like this. Maybe it's possible. It's very possible. I don't know how it works, but you see here there's a whole recipe. So it could be you take one. First of all, how big is the fish? I don't even know.
I searched it up. I don't know if it's right.
That's what it said?
I don't know.
You searched up Techelet or Chilazon?
Yeah, Chilazon.
And what shows up?
The first thing that shows up, it's where you go and then it says here Techelet what they thought, what they think it is.
I don't know. It's a good question. Anyway, but the point I'm making here is that you could use a Techelet without the lava, without the tzitzit, and tzitzit without Techelet. So how do you do that?
The thing is like this. So this is what they think it is.
I think it's this kind of fish.
Yeah, something like that.
Either they're right or they're wrong. You never know.
Just so that
It's possible. I don't know. You can never know. Okay, so let's see now. So Rashi explains, what does this mean that you can do the mitzvah just with tzitzit or just with techelet, right? That's what the Mishnah just told us. So it says Rashi, the last text on the third page there. First he quotes the Mishnah, which says that you can have the techelet without the tzitzit and the tzitzit without the techelet. He explains, even though it's a mitzvah to have 2 out of the 4, should be Techelet, get a befarish to come on, as the Gemara is going to explain later. Unless it doesn't stop you. A as Z, they don't stop each other, meaning you can do the mitzvah without the other. The Abed arba'atan techelet, but if you did all 4 of them techelet, arba'atan lavan yatzar, or if you did all 4 white, all 4 regular tzitzit, you also fulfilled your obligation. But you have to have 4, and that's because it says gedilin tasalach. Where is that pasuk? I don't know the pasuk here. Tosfos quotes the pasuk. I forgot to put the Tosfos here. Anyway, there's a pasuk which tells us that you have to have at least 4 strings because it's a double plural, right? What's the minimum of plural? Minimum plural is 2, and there's a pasuk which has a double plural, and therefore you must have 4. So even though the proper way of doing it is to do 2 tzitzit and 2 techelet, but if you don't have techelet, and the Mishnah is telling us you can have techelet without tzitzit and tzitzit without techelet, you can do the mitzvah either way, right? But you still have to have 4 because the pasuk says double plural. I don't have the pasuk in front of me here, but that's what it is. Sorry? So it seems that it stopped sometime around the end of the first Beis Hamikdash. That's my understanding. That it ended that once they left Israel, they were in exile. They forgot that, or not they forgot, but they didn't have access to. So I imagine it's a kind of fish that came up near Israel. That's where they were living. But then after they were out, they lost it already. They lost that tradition. That's what it seems like. Maybe it's in the second temple, but I'm pretty sure it's at the end of the first temple. Which means by the time they get to the Mishnah and the Gemara, they don't really have Techelet anymore. I think. That's what I remember. So they had by tradition these descriptions, but they didn't know much more about it. They knew that they knew that the chilazon fish looked like this. They knew it came up once in 70 years, and they knew that you have to mix it with herbs to make dye, but they didn't know where and how to get that actual chilazon fish. So it seems. But you're right. There are those who feel that they know what it is today, and others who feel that not found yet. Okay. Now, let's get to. Sorry? Yeah. So that's true. It's if you know that you're not selling legit techelet and you're telling people you're selling real techelet, that's a big problem. That's being dishonest. It's not just being dishonest. You're using people's faith in a mitzvah for your own benefit. It's a terrible thing, right? It's the same thing to me. It's the exact same thing as a butcher who says he's kosher butcher and he's selling non-kosher meat. It's terrible, right? Okay, so now we're going to get to like this. When and how do you have to do this mitzvah? So let's see. So we're going to skip the Gemara Menachem. We're going to get back to that in a second, but I want to first look at the next page. We're going to go to the Rambam's Laws of Tzitzis. So Rambam chapter 3 of Laws of Tzitzit. You see it's on the next page. So over there, the English comes before the Hebrew. I'm going to read the Hebrew, but you can look at the English if you want. Hey chiyuv mitzvah tzitzis. How does this mitzvah of tzitzis work? Kol adam shechayav lasas mitzvah zu. Every person who's obligated to do this mitzvah is how? It's only if you put on a garment that actually should have tzitzis. Then yatla tzitzis you got to put on tzitzis, and then you put it on. If you put on this garment without tzitzis, how did bittul mitzvah say? Then he violated a positive commandment to put on tzitzis. He didn't do it. If a person has a garment that's supposed to have tzitzis, if he doesn't put them on, It's just folded and left in his shelf. Does not have to have tzitzis. The obligation is not to put it on the talis, on the garment. It's only an obligation on the person to wear a talis. Let me explain what he means. There are certain mitzvahs that is a question of, you ever the difference between chefza versus gavra? There's chefza means object, gavra means person. There are some things it's a mitzvah for you to do, but the mitzvah is not on the person, it's on the object. So this may not be a perfect example, but an example might be a mezuzah. The house must have a mezuzah. Now, I'm only obligated to have a house, to have a mezuzah if I own it and live there. But the mitzvah is on the house. Whether I'm there or not there, it has to be there. It's an obligation. To have mezuzah on the house, for sure. Absolutely. But tzitzit, if I own a bunch of talits, but I'm never wearing them, do I have to put tzitzit on them? If I own a bunch of talits. Remember, we learned this. Talit is the clothing, tzitzit is the white, and techelet is... Sorry? Why? Because I am not wearing it. Even if it's a shirt that has to wear tzitzit, that has to have tzitzit.
Or you could have 100.
So the tzitzit is basically only an obligation when I'm wearing it. It's not an obligation on the cloth. It's an obligation on me when I wear it. Yeah, but you can't have a house that has mezuzah. Right? Even if you're not there. You still have to have a house mezuzah. But tzitzit, if I'm not wearing it, I don't have to have tzitzit on it. The mitzvah is not to put it on. The mitzvah is not to put the fringes onto the clothing. The mitzvah is that if I'm going to wear it, I have to put the fringes on it. Okay. That's right. So which means like this, it's an interesting thing. What if I never wear a piece of clothing that, first of all, what kind of clothing has to have tzitzit? Anybody knows? What does Torah say? Arba kanfot, 4 corners. So what's the kind of clothing that needs to have its pierced tzitzit? Only kind of clothing that has 4 corners, even if it has 5 corners, but at least 4 corners. If it has 4 corners, it has to have tzitzit. So what makes a corner? How high do I have to cut it? It has to go up, if I'm not mistaken, it has to go up more than halfway up the clothing. So if I take the shirt that I'm wearing right now, if I cut it an inch, half an inch, so I have 4 corners. But how high is the cut?
High, but it's
And it's closed at the top?
no.
Oh, it's a good question. That's a good question. That's a very good question. You have to put on tzitzit, yeah. You have to, yeah, absolutely. Otherwise you can't wear the shirt. So for example, I'll give you an example. You ever know this Chabad wears a kapata? You know those like big long jackets that Chabad wears on Shabbat? Yeah. So in the back there's a slit, right?
Yeah.
So if you remind me, you see me on Shabbat, I'll show you. One corner on the slit is round. Why? Because if it was square, I would have the front of my jacket at the bottom. There's 2 corners. The back flap where the slit is has 2 corners. That would make 4 corners. I'd have to have tzitzit. So what? It is more than halfway. It's sure halfway. It goes up to my waist, right? But if I cannot wear any clothing that has 4 corners, I can't wear it unless I have tzitzit, right? So if this jacket has 4 corners, this long kapata it's called, this long coat, I'd have to wear tzitzit. So what do? We round 1 corner. So it's only 3 corners. So you have to have 4 corners. 2 on the front, 2 on the back. You have to wear tzitzit. Again, so tzitzit is not an obligation that you should wear tzitzit. The obligation of tzitzit that I'm just said is that if you have a pair of clothing that has 4 corners, you must wear tzitzit. So it doesn't matter if you have 6 pairs of clothing, but all of them has 4 corners, you have to have tzitzit on every single one of them. Right? But if you had no clothing that had 4 corners, do you have to wear tzitzit? So it seems no. Doraita, the biblical commandment is that if you're wearing a pair of clothing with 4 corners, you have to wear tzitzit. But if you're not wearing a clothing with 4 corners, you have to wear tzitzit. If you're wearing 10 clothing that have 4 corners, you have to wear 10 pairs of tzitzit. You have to have tzitzit on every single one of these things. 1 second, one at a time. What? You do. When you put it on, you're doing a mitzvah. But the question is, do you have to? It's an obligation. Do you have an obligation to go find a pair of clothing that has 4 corners and put tzitzit on it? Answer from Torah, no. It's a pair of clothing. Anything you're wearing, anything you're going to wear, any garment. If you have 4 corners, you have to wear you have to have tzitzit on them, or make sure that one of the corners is not an actual corner around it. Sure. That's a good question. So the truth is that only because the pasuk says "v'li'itemoto," you have to see them. That's what Torah says. Torah says you're going to wear your tzitzit, you're going to see them, and it's going to remind you of the mitzvahs. So because the Torah says you have to see them, so the halacha is that only a pair of clothing that you're supposed to wear during the day needs tzitzit. A night clothing doesn't. So if you have a nightgown, and that nightgown, you only wear it when you go to sleep. You only wear it at night. And it has 4 corners, you're not obligated to have tzitzit. It's only for day clothing. Only clothing that are made for the day. Even if you're also going to wear them at night, but it only made for the day. Is that clear? So again, the commandment is only if you happen to have a garment of 4 corners, you have to put it on. That's it. Anything that has 4 corners. Not a little cut, has to have 4 corners. If it's a small cut, it's not considered a corner. Very rarely does that exist. I'm not so worried about it. Theoretically, yes, the answer is yes. When you put it on, big bracha. Right? Because the mitzvah is not that they should sit in your closet with 4. It's if you're going to wear it. Right? So before you, this is what the Rambam said. Look at the Rambam again. Again, if he wears a garment requiring tzitzit, should attach tzitzit to it and then wear it. That's the mitzvah. If you have a garment that has 4 corners, if it's going to sit in your closet, you don't have to put it on the tzitzit. But if you're going to put it on, you have to wear tzitzit. So you make the bracha when you put them on. Clear? Not when you put them onto the garment. Not when you put the tzitzit in the garment, but when you put it on to wear them. Clear? And you're not allowed to put them on until you have the tzitzit on them. If this garment has 4 corners. Clear? Okay. So the question becomes, if this is the case, it's possible for a person to go through his whole life and never do the mitzvah of tzitzit. Yeah. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to wear those clothing. If you have a clothing with 4 corners and it has no tzitzit, you're not allowed to wear it. Right? That's the mitzvah. You're violating the mitzvah if you have a 4-cornered garment with no tzitzit on it. Oh no, you just hide it. So I have tzitzit. I wear it all the time. So when I go to a cemetery, I tuck it in because I don't want to make fun of the people that are sleeping, that passed away, and that they can't do the mitzvah. Right? Okay. So now the question becomes: it's possible then, theoretically, for a person to go through his whole life, right, and never wear tzitzit, and never have to wear tzitzit because he never puts on a garment with 4 corners, which means he'll live his whole life and never do a mitzvah Hashem asked him, and didn't violate anything, right? Because the commandment is only if you have a garment with 4 corners, and he never put on a garment with 4 corners, right? So it's a possibility. So let's see. Now let's go back. Before we continue the Rambam, let's go back to the Gemara just on top of it. You see the Gemara on top of the page there? Menachat 41a. See it? Says the Gemara like this. The third word. The Malcha Ashke Rav Katina. Right? An angel, look at the English here. An angel found Rav Katina when he was wearing a linen cloak, which is exempt from tzitzit. The angel said to him, Katina, Katina, if you wear a cloak like this in the summer and a coat, a sarbala, which only has 2 corners and is therefore does not have tzitzit in the winter, what will become of the tzitzit? The angel came to Katina and said, look at you. You're wearing a coat that only has 2 corners. You wear this in the summer. In the winter, you're going to wear a different coat that only has 2 corners. And your whole life, you're never going to wear tzitzit. What kind of thing is this? Can you imagine? An angel from heaven came to Katina and telling him this? What? That's right. But that was all he was wearing. He was wearing, they used to only wear like 1 piece of clothing, a long robe. A thicker one in the winter, and they didn't have so much cloth like we have today to make 10 pairs of clothing that we all wear. Back in the day, they only used to wear a robe. Yeah. So he was wearing this robe in summer, and he would have this other kind of cloak in the winter. And it was only made of 2 corners. So he would go his whole year never wearing tzitzit. And the angel comes to him and says, Katina, Katina, come on, you're never doing this tzitzit mitzvah. You're not obligated, it's true. But how could you go your whole life without wearing tzitzit, without doing what Hashem wants for tzitzit? What? It could be, like the corners. If the corner could be up here, if all four on one side, then you don't need tzitzit. So if you have two up here and two down here, no. But if it's two in the front, two in the back, then yes. Two in the front and two in the back, then yes. So let's go through this. So what do you think Katina told the angel? Let's look at the English here. So if Katina said to him, do you punish us even for failing to fulfill a positive mitzvah? In other words, Katina is saying to him, why are you screaming at me for not wearing tzitzit? I'm not obligated. You're punishing me now because I'm not wearing tzitzit. I don't have to. Good argument. So what did the angel say? So the angel said to him, at a time when there is divine anger and judgment, we punish even for the failure to do a positive mitzvah. Meaning to say, you're right, Katina, says the angel. You don't have to wear tzitzit. But it's certainly a big zechut if you do. And if something in heaven is going on, and they look at you and they see, oh, look at this guy. He doesn't have to wear tzitzit, so he's not wearing it. Not a good thing. Following? No, it's like this. This is the Gemara telling us that even though you're not obligated to do something, but Hashem wants you to do it. Come on, do it. That's what the angel's saying to Katina. You're right. You don't technically have to wear tzitzit because you don't have a garment with four corners. But in heaven, they're looking at you, and they're kind of like, not literally, but they're kind of like, with their folded arms, look at this guy. He's being so smart. He's not wearing tzitzit because he doesn't have to. Come on, it's a mitzvah from Hashem. Go do it. And if there's something negative going on in heaven, there's a big schut you're missing out on by not wearing the tzitzit. Clear? Okay, so now let's go back to the Rambam and see like this. See the Rambam, you see what it says Yud Aleph or 11? 11 in English or Yud Aleph on the next page in Hebrew? Yeah. So I'm doing Hebrew and you can look at English. Even though a person is not obligated to have a garment with four corners and put on tzitzis, in order that she should wear tzitzis. Right? It's not obligated, we just said that before. But we just learned from the story that even though you don't have to, the angel is telling Katina, you should, right? Therefore, says the Rambam, Ein ro'el adam chassid. It's not appropriate for a good Jew to make himself live in such a way that he never has to do the mitzvah. Right? But rather, he should work and he should try to be wearing a kind of clothing that does need tzitzis. So you should be able to do the mitzvah. It's true, you don't need to. But come on, it's a mitzvah from Hashem. Go do it. So that's the first thing the Rambam says. That a chassid, someone who's looking to really connect to Hashem, should wear tzitzis all the time, even though it's not obligated. But during prayer, then you for sure have to wear it. Gnai gadol is a great embarrassment. The Talmidei Chachamim, for someone who is a good religious Jew, daven them without tzitzis. That's an embarrassment. So he says here two things. Number one, a person should really do tzitzis. You're not obligated. It's true. Because only if you have a garment of four corners, you need to have it. And if you're not wearing a garment of four corners, you don't have to have tzitzit. But you certainly should. Because it's a mitzvah from Hashem. You have an opportunity to do a mitzvah. You definitely should. Right, but remember, tzitzit and talit. Tzitzit is the strings in the corner. Whether it's the small one that I'm wearing over here, or whether it's the big one, it makes a difference. The point is it's a garment that has four corners that has to have the tzitzit, the strings. And that's what he's saying. He's saying it's a big embarrassment for someone to go pray and he doesn't have a talit on, doesn't have tzitzit on. Whatever kind of tzitzit, whether it's a big talit, the small talit, right? If you don't wear talit, remember, what do you mean when you say tzitzit? Oh, talit katan. Right. So the talit katan, the small garment that I'm wearing under my shirt right now that has four corners and has tzitzit on it, I'm wearing that because the Rambam writes here that even though I don't have to wear tzitzit, it's a good thing to always wear it. It's an opportunity to do a mitzvah. And then there's number two, when I'm praying, you're saying someone who's praying doesn't have to wear a big talit because he already has a tzitzit under a shirt? Technically, it's true, which is why in Chabad, you don't wear the big talit until you get married. Before you get married, you're wearing tzitzit, a small tzitzit that's under your shirt because it has a small garment, that, like an undershirt that has four corners with tzitzit hanging on it, right? And you don't have to wear it you don't have to put on another talit during prayer. Once we're married, the custom is to put on a talit also, because that's for a different reason. That's for Kabbalah, not for halacha, really. Sorry? It's also for Kabbalah reasons. Because when a person's married, they get to a higher level, they're supposed to wear a higher level of talit. Okay, but the point is like this: there's three things. Number one, you're not obligated unless you have the garment of four corners. Number two, says the Rambam, you're right, you don't have to wear it, but come on, you really should. It's a mitzvah, like the angel told Katina. You don't have to wear tzitzit because you don't have a garment of four corners, but you should really get a garment of four corners and put on the tzitzit because you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah. And number three, says the Rambam, for sure when you're praying, you should wear it because if you don't, it's a big embarrassment. Right? And then the Rambam concludes here, a person should always be careful about the mitzvah of tzitzit. Shari Kosov, Shkula, Vatolava, Kala mitzvahs, because the Torah connected it to all the mitzvahs. Remember, the pasuk says, you see the tzitzis, is called a mitzvah Hashem, and you remember all of Hashem's mitzvahs. So not only is it a regular mitzvah, but it's actually a mitzvah that's connected to all mitzvahs. So certainly you should do it. And especially like we learned in Tanya. We learned in Tanya that a mitzvah is a way of connecting to Hashem. Right? And every time you do a mitzvah, it's like you're giving Hashem a hug, or you're speaking the words of Torah like you're giving Hashem a kiss. Right? Because Hashem puts himself into the commandments. That means that the tzitzit is even more like that. Because literally the tzitzit literally goes around you. Actually, the mitzvah is that you should be wrapped in the tzitzit. When you make a bracha on the talit, not on the talit katan, not on the small talit you wear under your shirt, but the big talit that people wear when they pray. The bracha you make is Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kadosh Hashem v'tzivanu lehitatef b'tzitzit. What does lehitatef mean? To wrap yourself. That's the real mitzvah. The real mitzvah is to wrap yourself. So it's literally like a hug. It's literally like a hug. The tzitzit is mamish like a hug from Hashem. And the opportunity to walk around with a hug from Hashem, you're not going to take it. So it's true, I'm not obligated. But if I have the opportunity, what does it cost me? Nothing. A few dollars to buy myself a talit katan, and then I have the opportunity to walk around a full day long with Hashem hugging me. I'm not going to take the opportunity. Sorry? That's right. But even the reason why the bracha is letatef by the talit is because that's really the mitzvah. Really, the mitzvah is to be wrapped, which is why, as I mentioned, I told you before that you have to have two corners in the front and two in the back, because you're only a mitzvah that's wrapped on you. If it's all four in the front, it's not. Yeah, why you make the different brachas is a good question, but we'll leave that for now. But I'm saying is that the mitzvah really is that you should be wrapped in this garment, that the garment is to be wrapped in you. So really, the tzitzit is an opportunity to be hugged by Hashem 24/7, and that's why it's such a big deal to wear tzitzit, even though you're not obligated. You're only obligated when you have a garment of four corners. Okay? So let's go a little bit further here. Now we have, what did I want to show you before? We learned the Gemara already. Okay, now, before we get to the next thing, what we're going to get to is, we're going to get to a halacha, right? About why you actually should be wearing tzitzit right away in the morning, even though you don't need to. Before we get to that, we're going to learn a little bit about the parsha of tzitzit. Remember, yesterday we read the part of the Torah that tells us to keep the mitzvah of tzitzit, right? And that's the third section of Shema, which starts off with Vayomer, right? So let's see what the Gemara says about that special parsha. Now, remember yesterday we also said that what's the real halachic reason why that parsha Vayomer, that third paragraph is in the Shema? Because of Mitzrayim. Now, the question the Gemara asks is, why do we choose this one? Why not any other one? There's 1,000 places, There's a lot of places in the Torah where Mitzrayim is mentioned. So why do we choose tzitzit out of all of them? Meaning, if the whole point is that you have to fulfill the obligation to mention Mitzrayim every day, there's many ways you can do that. You can read any other parsha. Why pick the parsha of tzitzit to do that? Sorry? So let's see. Says the Gemara this. This is the Gemara on Brachas, Yud Beis and Yud Beis, 12b. You see it there? Parsha tzitzit mipnei kavua. Why did they choose the parsha of tzitzit to put at the third paragraph of Shema? Rabbi Huda bar Chaviva, Rabbi Huda son of Chaviva says, mipnei sheyesh ba chamisha dvarim, because the parsha of tzitzit doesn't just have Mitzrayim, it has 5 things. Number 1, mitzvah tzitzit. It has the mitzvah tzitzit, which itself is amazing. Like we said before, it's a hug from Hashem. Number 2, Yitzit Mitzrayim, going out of Egypt, which is an amazing thing. And as we explained yesterday, Yitzit Mitzrayim happens even today because Hashem gives us the opportunity to go out of our own selfish self and become connected to Him. Number 3, it talks about all mitzvahs, accepting mitzvahs from Hashem, all the mitzvahs. Number 4, it says dat minim. It talks about staying away from heretics, from people who don't believe in Torah. Hidud Aveda, number 5, It stops. It talks about, it's actually 6 things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 5 besides for Mitzrayim. Yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah. Yes, besides Mitzrayim. Here, Aveda, it includes telling you to not think about sin. And number 5, it includes here Avodah Zarah, not thinking about Avodah Zarah. So because let me conclude this thought. Sorry? Which is what? Oh, where are those 5 things in the Shema? In this, okay, the Gemara is going to say. Let's see. So we're going to get to that. So the Gemara says like this. The reason why they chose, out of all the parts of the Torah that talk about Mitzrayim, why they choose the Parsha of Tzitzit? Because the Parsha of Tzitzit doesn't just have Mitzrayim, it has 5 other things. Tzitzit, accepting all of mitzvahs, staying away from heretics, staying away from sin, and staying away from Avodah Zarah. So where is that? Let's see. Says the Gemara, Bishlema, look at the next page. Bishlema hani tlas mefarashim. Okay, the first 3 are easy to find in the Parsha of Tzitzit. All mitzvahs, the idea of accepting all the mitzvahs is easy, right? Because the pasuk says, you'll see the tzitzit and remind you of all the mitzvahs. Okay, it's easy to find, right? Tzitzit, that's obvious there. The pasuk says, make tzitzit. Okay. Yitzias Mitzrayim, the fact that the pasuk says, remembering Egypt is also easy to find because the parsha concludes, Asher tzeti eschem eretz Yisrael, took out of Egypt. Ella, but das minim, staying away from heretics. Here Avera, staying away from sin. Here Avodah Zarah, and staying away from Avodah Zarah. Minolan, where are they to be found in this parsha? The yoke of mitzvahs is there because it says you'll see it and you'll remember all the mitzvahs, right? So let's see the next paragraph. The Tanya could be learned. The pasuk says, don't follow your heart, right? The pasuk says, this is going to remind you not to follow your eyes and not to follow your heart. So it says like this, not to follow your heart, zuminus. This is telling you stay away from heretic. And there's another pasuk which says, Amar Nova, Beliba Enelikim. The foolish one says in his heart, there's no God. So you see that heresy is a question of the heart. So the pasuk says, don't follow your heart. It means to stay away from heresy, not believing in Hashem. Okay. Then the pasuk says, Achrei Nechem, don't follow your eyes. What's that? Almost close. Zuhir Aveda, this means stay away from sin. Don't follow your eyes. Your eyes see things. We learned from Rashi. Your eyes see things. You want it? So the pasuk says, stay away from it. And then the pasuk says, Atem Zainim, don't follow your eyes to which you are led astray. Zainim means to lead astray. What is that a reference to? Zehir Avodah Zarah. This means to stay away from idol worship, because idol worship is straying from Hashem. Okay. So we see that this parsha of Tzitzit is a very, very special parsha. It's loaded with lots of messages, right? So it gives us more of a flavor, more of an idea of how important the mitzvah of Tzitzit is. That it's connected to all these things. Mitzvah is Tzitzit is connected to staying away from heresy. It's connected to staying away from sin, because it's a reminder not to take the things you see with your eyes. It's a reminder to stay away from Avodah Zarah. It's a reminder for all the mitzvahs. It's a reminder for going out of Egypt. There's all of these things connected to Tzitzit. Connected to the parsha of Tzitzit and connected to the wearing of Tzitzit. So it gives you more of a feeling and a flavor for why it's so important to wear Tzitzit, even though you're not technically obligated. But now let's see something else. Here the author writes something very, very interesting, and we'll conclude with this. Let's see. So you see the last text on the page there. You can look at the English, I'm looking at the Hebrew. Kol hakoida kriya Shema. Anyone who reads Shema, below Tzitzit, without wearing Tzitzit, meyud edus sheker ba'atzmai. It's as if he is saying false testimony. You know what testimony is? Witness. Why is it like someone being false witness? Why, if I say Shema without tzitzit on, is it like I'm saying false witness? So it explains. Hayil shall call Adam Tzar. 1 second. Wait, not yet. Yes, that's what he's saying. No, if you say Shema without tzitzit, it's like you're lying. Why? Because what do you read about when you say Shema? You read about tzitzit. Imagine you're talking to Hashem and you're describing the mitzvah of tzitzit, and here you are not doing it. The Gemara says the same thing about tefillin. That someone who says Shema without wearing tefillin, it's like he's making false testimony. Why? Because in the Shema it says, you got to put the tefillin on your hand. You have to have it on your head. So if you're saying Shema without tefillin, it's like you're saying a falsity. So says the Alter Rebbe, the same thing's true of tzitzit. If you're saying Shema without tzitzit, it's like you're saying a falsity. When it comes to Shema, is it optional? Sorry? So not that you can't wear tzitzit, you're not obligated to wear tzitzit at night. But you could, right? So let's see. So which means like this: waking up in the morning and saying Shema, is that obligation or voluntary? Obligation. So if I'm obligated to say Shema, then I'm obligated to at least wear tzitzis during the Shema. The Alter Rebbe said, the Rambam wrote that it's embarrassing if you pray without tzitzit, right? The Alter Rebbe is saying even more. You actually have to wear tzitzit when you say Shema because otherwise you're like a liar. Following? Didn't say you're not allowed to. It says you're not obligated. You're allowed to. In fact, I wear tzitzit when I sleep. Chabad wears tzitzit even in sleep. Don't have to, but we do it anyway. So now the Alter Rebbe is like this. Sorry?
The Chacham say that you shouldn't be wearing, even in the Mishnah, it says you shouldn't be wearing at night.
It says you don't have to. It doesn't say you can't.
So you just said that if you don't wear at night,
during Shema,
it doesn't count.
I didn't say it doesn't count. It says if you're saying something not true. So which means you should put it on for tzitzit, yeah. There's nothing wrong with wearing tzitzit at night. So before you go to bed and you're saying Shema, when you're davening Arvit, you wear your tzitzit, yeah. What? No, tefillin at night. So when it comes to tefillin, the way the Shulchan Aruch explains it is, someone who never wears tefillin at all, it's as if he's not saying a truth when he's saying Shema. But not that you have to say wear tefillin every time you say Shema. Because you're not wearing tefillin when you daven Arvit. But tzitzit you should be wearing when you're saying Shema. Tefillin you don't wear it at night. Yes, but it's a different story. That's somebody, in other words, when I'm saying Shema at night and I'm talking about tefillin, I'm not saying anything that's like a falsity. Because I wore tefillin this morning. Right? If I didn't wear tefillin in the morning, it would be like I'm lying. Sorry? Okay, so let's say you don't have to wear tzitzit at night Shema, but for sure you have to say by day Shema. Okay, so now let's see the Alter Rebbe. It's like this. Ready? Now everybody is obligated to do the mitzvah at the earliest opportunity. Right? You ever heard this expression? Zirizin magdimin lemitzvahs. A person is supposed to do the mitzvah at the earliest possible opportunity. Which means I have to say Shema in the morning. And when I say Shema in the morning, I have to be wearing my tzitzit. Right? And now if I want to do the mitzvah as early as possible, when should I put on my tzitzit? L'chein, therefore, take if miyad achan atilat yadayim, as soon as he washes his hands, sheyadav nekiyos, his hands are now clean, v'yachal levarach, and he's now allowed to make a bracha. Because before you wash the yadayim, you can't make a bracha. Yitatef b'tzitzit, you should put on your tzitzis. So what do we learn? The Alter Rebbe says, this is his logic. When you're saying Shema, you have to wear tzitzit, otherwise you're saying a false testimony. Okay, you have to say Shema in the morning, which means you have to wear tzitzit in the morning. Now, because you're supposed to do the mitzvah as soon as you can, when should you put on your tzitzit? As soon as you can. Because you know you have to do the mitzvah later anyway when you say Shema, so do it right away. And this is how the Alter Rebbe comes to the conclusion that right when you're done saying the Techelet Yadayim, put on your tzitzit. And at least wear it till after your Shema. Best, wear it all day. And here you have an opportunity for Hashem to be giving you a hug all day. Why wouldn't you take the opportunity?
I know, you just said now that.
Clear?
You just said now before.
Yeah.
That I was talking about the team, and you said, "Oh no, like you already did this morning." So you could say
the truth is that back in the old day, people used to wear tefillin all day. They used to. You're right. They used to wear tefillin all day. And there's actually a yeshiva in Yerushalayim, and you'll see that they still wear tefillin all day. I remember I met a few people from that yeshiva. Walk around the street, they're wearing tefillin. And the reason we don't is because when you're wearing tefillin, your body, you have to be in full control of your body. You can't let any gas or air come out of your body. And your mind has to be clean of any negative thoughts. You take it off when you go to the bathroom. But just generally, when you're wearing tefillin, you have to keep your mind clear of any negative thoughts. You have to keep your body gufnak. You have to keep your body clean. And because it's too hard for us nowadays to be conscious of that all day long, that's why we don't wear tefillin all day. But you're right. Back in the old day, people used to wear tefillin all day because just like tzitzit, you have an opportunity to walk around with a mitzvah. You're not going to walk around with it? Of course you are. So you have the opportunity to walk around with your tefillin all day with a mitzvah. Why aren't you going to do it? And they used to. We don't because we can't keep our bodies up to that standard and we can't keep our mind to that standard. But theoretically, we should. But tzitzit does not require that same level of clean mind and body, and therefore people still wear tzitzit all day. Like the angel told Katina, you have an opportunity to do Hashem's mitzvah. Why aren't you going to take it? And if God forbid something going on in heaven, the tzitzit is going to be a schut for you. And it's an opportunity to have Hashem's hug with you all day. So of course, if we can, we should use that opportunity. Okay, so tomorrow, we're going to look at one more section of tzitzit, Or maybe actually, okay, tomorrow we're going to do something else. I have something else in mind for tomorrow. And then on Monday, let me know what's the next subject you guys want to talk about. What's the next subject you guys want?